Hi and welcome to the JV1080 training video. My name is Tim Walter and I'm going to be guiding you around the all essential parts of this stunning Roland sound module. Firstly, let's take a look at the front and the back panels of the JV1080 and familiarise ourselves with the layout of the buttons and the connections we'll be using. The rear of the JV1080 is laid out fairly simply. MIDI in, out and through sockets here, and 6 output jack sockets here. To enable us to play the sounds on the JV1080, we need to connect a MIDI keyboard to the MIDI in socket here. In actual fact, you can connect any MIDI device to the JV1080, such as a MIDI guitar or MIDI drum pads, but for this video, I'll be using a simple MIDI controller keyboard, in this case, the Roland JW50. Once the keyboard is connected, we need to connect the audio outputs of the JV1080 to a suitable source, such as a hi-fi system, amplifier and speakers, or mixer. As we've just seen, the JV1080 has 6 audio outputs. I'll show you how they're used later on. For the meantime, simply connect the mix out, left and right sockets to your hi-fi or amplifier. Okay, let's now take a look at the front panel of the JV1080. On the left here, we have the overall volume control and the headphone socket. If you don't have a suitable monitoring source for the JV1080, as I described earlier, you may want to use headphones. The volume control adjusts the volume of both the audio outputs and the headphones, so make sure it's not set too high, especially when using headphones. Across the top of the JV1080 is the LCD display, where we can view the sounds and parameters we're going to be using and editing. Underneath the display are the part selection button, palette button, parameter button, and function select buttons. On the right here, we have a group of buttons for moving around the screen and editing the parameters of the JV1080. The value knob here is probably the fastest way of entering values. The increment and decrement buttons here also enable us to change values, whilst the 4 arrow buttons below enable us to move between the various pages and parameters. The top group of buttons here are the mode select buttons and select the various modes that are available on the JV1080, such as performance, patch and rhythm. Underneath are the shift, exit and enter buttons, which are used to select and confirm parameter values. The sound group buttons at the top here are where we select the various sounds in the JV1080, and the card slots underneath are where cards with extra sounds and space to save sounds are inserted. Finally, the MIDI indicator and power switch. Well, the power switch is fairly self-explanatory, but the MIDI indicator may not be so obvious. This is a handy indication of when the JV1080 is receiving a MIDI signal from a device connected to its MIDI in socket. If you find that the keyboard you've connected to the JV1080 is not playing any of the sounds, the first thing to check, other than if it's connected of course, is if MIDI information is getting to the JV1080. If the MIDI indicator doesn't flash when the keyboard is played, then information is not getting through. You may need to change the cable, check the connection, or make sure your keyboard is transmitting MIDI data. Now, you may have noticed that some of the buttons have several things written next to them. That's because they perform several different functions depending which mode of operation the JV is set to. I'll explain each set of functions in detail when we get to that section in the video, but for now, just bear in mind some buttons can perform more than one function. Enough looking, let's hear something. And what better than the demo songs inside the JV1080, an ideal taster of what's to come. Press the Shift button and without letting go of it, press the Enter button. The screen should now show ROM play, song and chain play. We can now use the data wheel or the increment decrement buttons to choose one of the 3 demo songs in the JV1080. If we select chain play, the JV1080 will play all 3 demo songs one after the other. Once you've selected the demo song, press the Enter button to play it. The Exit button will stop the song. I'll select number 1, Rise. Press Enter and off we go. There's often a little gap here as the song loads up, but here we go. Pretty impressive, hey? There's some great sounds there. Let's take a listen to some of those individually. A patch is JV1080 terminology for a basic sound that appears right across our keyboard. I suppose you could think of this as a normal playing mode. So, how do we get to patch play mode? If you're still in demo mode, press the exit button now. Just press the patch mode button here and its LED will light to show us it's selected. We are now in patch play mode. The display will show the currently selected sound. In this case it's user 001 Symphonique. You'll notice the MIDI message indicator flashing as I press a key on my keyboard, confirming that MIDI information is being received by the JV. So, what about the rest of the sounds? Well, firstly, a quick explanation on how the patches are organised in the JV1080. There are basically 640 internal patches available to you, and to make finding them a little easier, they've been arranged into banks of 128. There are preset banks A, B, C and D, and a user bank. The user bank is where you can save your own patches, but it actually comes with a selection of patches in it already, which you can overwrite, of course. All of these patches, though, can also be found in the preset locations, so don't worry, you can't ever erase your favourite sounds. Up to 255 more patches can be found on the expansion boards if you have those fitted, but more on those at the end of the video. We've currently selected user patch 001 Symphonic. Let's take a listen to some of the other preset and user patches. The simplest way to select a new patch is using the data wheel here. It scrolls through all of the available patches. User patches first, and then preset banks A, B, C and D, there's A, so on. Let's choose another sound from bank A. Let's choose sound number 72. There we go. Fantasia JV. Now you may have noticed that it took quite a long time to scroll through to find that sound we wanted. Well, we can actually do things far more efficiently. It's as easy as a couple of button presses. Let's say I want to go to preset bank C. Well, just press the preset button and C here, preset C. I can now use the data wheel to select the exact patch I want, like this. Here, for example, is C04, brass section. If I want to move more slowly through the patches, I could also use the increment and decrement buttons here, which, like the data wheel, scroll through the patches, but even more slowly, one at a time, up and down. Here are some trombones at 5, and a patch called Hybrid Bones at 6. Now here's another special trick. If you hold Shift and press the increment and decrement buttons, the patches scroll through in tens. Pretty neat, hey? Makes things a lot quicker. There are some pretty stunning patches available on the JV, from realistic acoustic sounds such as pianos and guitars through to electric basses and strings with some amazing totally synthesized patches thrown in. Let's take a listen to a few more. At preset A001 is a great sounding acoustic piano. And at preset A110, if we can find it, there we go, is an acoustic guitar that actually produces harmonics when I hit the key hard like this. Preset B54 is an amazing synthesized sound that actually has its own rhythm. If you have one of the many JVC series PCM sound cards that are available, or a data card, you can insert it into the card slot on the right here and access the patches stored on it by pressing the User Card button and selecting either Data Card or PCM Card buttons here. The Data Wheel or the Increment Decrement buttons will then select patches from the card. If you're using either a PCM or data card, do take a moment to make sure it's inserted correctly. The card should be face up and pushed in until it firmly locates in the right slot. To remove a card, simply pull it gently out of the slot, but you must ensure you never remove it whilst the JV is playing. If you have one or more of the many wave expansion boards fitted to your JV, don't worry, I'll show you how to do that later in the video. You can select even more patches by selecting the EXP button here. Depending on which boards you have fitted, you can select A, B, C and D banks buttons and scroll through all of the patches on the wave board. I'm using the world board at the moment in slot A. This one's got 255 sounds on it. Let's play patch A183, Tablan Rhythm. Some of the wave expansion boards have less sounds on them, but still contain the same amount of raw data. Without going into very much depth, we can make some simple changes to any of the patches. Firstly, we can change the octave in which the patch is playing. Let's switch to patch A004, Piano. Preset A004, there we go. The octave parameter is actually on the screen in the patch play mode, so using the up and down arrows, we can instantly change the value. You can see the octave value changing and hear the patch go up and down in pitch an octave at a time. Now you may have noticed an asterisk appear next to the patch number over here. This shows us we've made a change to the patch. It's been edited basically. If I go back to 0 as the octave value, the asterisk stays there to show a change has still been made. So what else can we do to quickly change the way a patch sounds? Well, a brief explanation of what makes a patch is required here. A patch is made up of up to 4 individual tones. A tone is the smallest unit of sound in the JV1080, and mixing and matching up to 4 of these creates a patch. The greater the number of tones in a patch, the more complex it will sound. Let's take patch A73 Jimmy D. The 4 buttons here are the tone switch buttons and show how many tones are in the current patch. They're labelled 1, 2, 3 and 4, and we can see the first 4 are lit. These tone switch buttons actually enable us to turn each individual tone on and off, and therefore hear each tone making up our patch on its own. The current patch I've selected here is quite a complex pad sound, and as you can probably hear, is made up of a number of different sounds. These are the tones. If I switch all 4 tones off, so none of the 4 buttons are lit, no sound will be made when I play the keyboard. If I now switch on tone switch 1, you can hear the first individual tone on its own. It's a kind of bell sound. I can now switch that tone off and switch on tone 3. This tone is a smooth string type sound. Tone 2 is a high-pitched bell sound again, and tone 4 is a kind of breathy sound. Adding them all together by switching all the tones on gives us the overall patch. Just switching on tones 3 and 4 changes the sound of the patch completely. So I can quickly and easily alter the overall sound of any patch. As I've made changes to the patch, you'll notice the asterisk has appeared again to show us the patch has been edited. Until we save changes, nothing we do is permanent, so switching to another patch and then back again recalls the patch exactly as it was before we made any changes. Like so. See, the asterisk has now disappeared. This may not seem important right now, but wait until we get down to some really serious editing, which is exactly what we're going to do next. As I mentioned earlier, each patch is made up of up to 4 individual tones. We've already heard how each one sounds individually in a patch, and how adding them or taking them away changes the overall sound of a patch. But how about actually changing the sound of an actual tone? Each tone has a number of parameters that can be changed or edited, and these parameters dictate how the tone will sound. To edit the parameters, we need to be able to select them. This is done by pressing the parameter button here. I'll stick with the Jimmy D patch for now, but you can edit the tones in any of the 640 internal patches in the JV1080. OK, we're now in edit mode. The display hasn't changed much, but then we haven't chosen a parameter to edit yet. The buttons we use to edit tone parameters are the 8 buttons here under the display. Yes, the same buttons, well, 4 of the same buttons, we used to switch the tones on and off earlier. This time, it's the first row of legend or words under the buttons that we're interested in. So we have Common, Effects, Control, Wave, LFO, Pitch, TVF and TVA. Conveniently, they're written in orange letters, the same as the patch legend. So we know that these functions relate to patch editing. Let's dive in at the deep end straight away by pressing the parameter button marked TVA at the end here. Now before we start editing any parameters, take a look at the left of the LCD screen up here. At the top you can see a number and 3 dashes. In this case it shows 1 dash dash dash, and below that you can see TVA. Just to the right is a thick vertical line with either an arrow at the top, the bottom, or both. In this case the arrow's at the bottom. These 3 pieces of information tell us exactly where we are, what we're doing, and to what. Now remember, a patch is made up to 4 tones. Well, the number at the top left of the screen tells us which of the 4 tones we're actually editing. In this case, it's tone 1. Underneath that, we can see the name of the group of parameters we're editing. TVA stands for Time Variant Amplifier. Basically, most of the parameters here are related to the level or amplitude of the selected tone. The parameters we can see on screen are not the only parameters available to us in this group. We can use the up and down arrow keys here to move between the various pages. The vertical arrows at the left of the screen here show whether there are more pages above or below the current one we're viewing. The screen is only so big, so rather than clutter it up with too much info, those nice guys at Roland have separated the information out into different windows called pages. You can see them change as I scroll through the various pages here. In this mode, we are editing the parameters of 1 tone at a time. So what about the other tones? How do we access them? Simple. The second set of 4 buttons under the screen here, on the right-hand side, are marked Tone Select, and that's where we select each tone. To select a different tone to edit, we had to exit the parameter mode. So press the parameter button so it's not lit. Now I can use the tone select buttons to select a different tone to edit, like so. You can see the display change to show the tone number in the top left corner, and the parameters on the display change to show the parameters of that tone. Now we're no longer in parameter mode, the tone switch buttons on the left still enable us to switch tones on and off individually, allowing us to hear the changes we're making to a single tone far more clearly. OK, let's edit. Select tone 3 using the tone select button, if it's not already selected that is, and switch off the other tones using the tone switch buttons. You should just have 3, should be lit like that. Playing the keyboard now, you should just hear the pad sound. Now we've selected our tone and switched the others off. Now it's time to edit. If you page up to the top here, the first 4 parameters in the TVA group can be seen across the screen. We have level, pan, V-sends, and V-curve. V stands, by the way, for velocity. Now, the left-right arrow buttons allow us to move across the screen and highlight a particular parameter ready for editing. I'll position the cursor under level and change its value using the data wheel. If I play as I change the level, you can hear the tone slowly disappear, and I can bring it back to its original value. The tone reappears. It's that simple to alter the parameter of a tone in a patch. Now, it's neat trick time now. Let me just take tone 3's level down again. Let's say down to 40. There we go. If I play the keyboard, I can hear the patch sounds now. But how did it sound before, at the original level? Well, I could scroll the level back up to 127 using the data wheel and check, or, and this is far easier, I can double-click the data wheel like this. The parameter instantly goes back to its original value. If I double-click again, it goes back to 40. This is a great way of comparing a change you make to the original value, and it works for all the parameters on the JV, not just this one. I'll tell you now that double-clicking is an acquired skill that you may not have instantly. Anyone who uses a computer with a mouse will tell you that learning to double-click takes a while. So if the parameter doesn't change when you press the data wheel, be patient. You must press the data wheel twice, quickly, like this. Too long a gap between the clicks and it won't work. Move the cursor across to V-sends using the left-right arrow. There we go. This parameter sets how the tone will react when I press the keyboard. V-sends stands basically for velocity sensitivity. If I set it to 0, set it to 0, and play the keyboard, you can hear that no matter how hard I play, or how softly I play the keys, the tone still sounds the same. If I set the parameter to 100, like so, and play, you can hear that when I press the key softly, the tone plays quietly. As I press harder, the tone plays louder. Now we've seen that setting the V-sends parameter to 100 means when I play softly, the tone plays softly, when I play hard, the tone is louder. Well, let's change the parameter to minus 100 and see what happens. We go down and down and down to minus 100. Now if I play softly, the tone is louder. As I increase how hard I play, the sound gets quieter. Great idea. So remember, if you set the parameter to a negative value, it does the opposite to when it's set to a positive value. Many of the parameters on the JV allow a negative value to be set, and you can create some really interesting effects. I'll just double-click on the data wheel to reset V-sends parameter to its original value of 46, just like that. At the moment, we're only listening to tone 3. The other tones are switched off. Now, with some parameters, that's a good idea, as the changes can be quite subtle. And if the other tones are on, it makes the changes difficult to hear. With something like level, however, it's probably better to hear all 4 tones together. Then we can adjust their respective volumes and create the balance we want in the patch. I'll switch all 4 tones on using the tone switches here. There we go. If I play the keyboard, There's the whole patch again. If I change the level of tone 3 now, you can hear it disappear from within the patch. Let's just go across the level. Turn it up, you can hear it coming back into the patch. Let's set the level to 50 for now. I can now move on and change the levels of some of the other tones. I can select tone 1 now, using the tone select switch here, and change its level maybe to 20. So at the moment we've adjusted 2 of the tone levels in this patch. As we've seen, it's fairly easy to switch between the tones using the tone select buttons. But on parameters such as level, where we are adjusting one parameter relative to another, it would be nice to be able to see all 4 parameters on the screen simultaneously. Well, we can do this by pressing the palette button here. Now that the display shows us the fact that we are adjusting level in the top left-hand corner of the display, and the levels of our 4 tones are all shown across the display here. If I use the cursor keys to move across the display, you can see the tone change on the display up here. Currently I'm on tone 1, whose level is 20. As I move across the screen, you can see I'm selecting tone 2, 3 and 4 and their levels. I can adjust them if I want to, like so. If you switch the palette button off for a second, you can see the parameters available to us on this page are level, pan, V-sends and V-curve. Now press the palette button again, so that all 4 levels are displayed simultaneously. If you now page down once, using the up-down arrow keys, the display changes to show us all of the pan parameters for the 4 tones simultaneously. If you page down again, all of the V-sense parameters, and so on and so on. The palette mode basically shows all 4 values for a single parameter simultaneously and lets you edit them. The tone switches still work in this mode, so I can quickly hear any tone on its own, adjust its parameter and switch the others back on to see how they all sound together. What haven't they thought of? Let's take a look at a few more parameters we can edit. I'll switch palette mode off and select tone 3 and turn the other tones off using the tone switch button so we can just hear the pad sound. I'll page down to bias setting. Oop, there we go, bias setting. This parameter lets us set how a tone's velocity will be mapped across the keyboard. I'll show you what I mean. Using the value wheel, I'll increase tone 3's bias setting to 100. Now if I play the keyboard from the bottom octave through to the top, you can hear the tone get louder the higher the note I play. Double-clicking the value wheel sets it back to 0 again. If I press the palette button, I can instantly see the bias settings of all 4 tones simultaneously. There we go. If I select tone 1, there, and switch on all of the other tones, so all 4 lights are now lit, I can now edit the bias setting of tone 1 whilst listening to the whole patch. I'll set it to -100. And you can now hear how the bottle sound appears in the tone as I play down the keyboard. Let's set that back to 0 again, so I double click with the value button there. I think that's such a great feature. So that's a few of the parameters in the TVA group. Let's take a look at some of the other parameter groups. Turn off the palette button, so it's not lit, and press the parameter button again. This now allows us to choose a new parameter group. Well, that was the obvious way of doing it. In fact, there's an even quicker way. With the parameter button off, you can still select different parameters to your patch by holding down Shift here and then using the left and right arrows here. This saves you having to keep switching the parameter button and it gives you continual access to the tone switch and tone select buttons. Great news. There we go. This time we'll select the pitch parameter group. So let's just find pitch again. There we go. To demonstrate this parameter, first of all select tone 1, so tone select 1, and turn off the other tones using the tone switch button. So we go 2, 3 and 4. Just see 1 is now just lit. Page up to the top, like so, and the parameters should read coarse, fine, random, and key flow. Coarse and fine allows us to change the tuning of the tone in semitones and fractions of a semitone, but it's the random parameter that I'll show you here. Use the left-right arrow keys to select the random parameter and set it to its maximum value of 1200. If I now play the same note on the keyboard several times, you can hear its pitch change randomly. Just playing a G here and just playing the same note and hear it change. The value you set is the range in which the pitch will change. If I set the value to 200, the pitch will only change a semitone either way. I'll set that back to 0. Each parameter group has quite a few pages attached to it, and each page has quite a few parameters. Going through each and every single one for each of the 4 tones would take an extremely long time. For that reason, I'll just deal with some of the more frequently used ones. TVF basically controls the brightness of a sound, and this is great for adding that extra little bite to some string sounds, for example. These parameters, though, so far only make subtle changes to the way a tone sounds within a patch. What about making a more fundamental change, like the actual waveform that the tone is made up from? Well, the basic sound of a tone comes from one of the many waveforms that are in the JV1080, or if you have them fitted, in the wave expansion boards. There are hundreds of waveforms ranging from synthetic sounds through to real samples like pianos, strings, and even guitar fret noise. Let's see how we can change one of the raw waveforms used in our current patch. Select the wave group of parameters and with a shift and arrows like that. Page up to the top of this group if you're not there already, and you should see the parameters group and number. Currently the group set is int B and the number 005 bottle hit. There are 2 internal groups of raw waveforms, both containing several hundred waves. There are also several hundred waveforms available on the wave expansion boards that can also be accessed from here as well. If I play the keyboard, you can hear the bottle hit sound. I'll move the cursor across to the number parameter and scroll through some of the other waveforms available in group int B, that stands for internal B. Number 19 is called wire string and sounds like that. Number 47, sorry I keep pressing the wrong button there. Number 47 is called organ click and can be used to produce some clicking sound, maybe in an organ patch. Some waves are in fact loops of several wave sounds and produce a rhythm within the patch. That's how some of the more bizarre techno patches are created. I can use the cursor keys to move back to the group parameter and set it to internal A. I can now move back to the number parameter and scroll through some of the waves available in that group. Number 1, for example, we'll use the note where it's quicker. Number 1 is an acoustic grand piano sound. And number 53 is a nylon guitar. Let's leave it on nylon guitar for a second and turn the other tones back on again using the tone switch buttons. So we can see all 4 lights. As I play, you can now hear the new nylon guitar based tone in the patch. If I scroll through the waves while all 4 tones are switched on, you can hear the overall sound of the patch change. As you can see, by changing the actual raw waveform on which the tone is based, you can radically change the overall sound of a patch very quickly and very easily. Well, we've done quite a bit of editing here, and I've changed the sound of the patch quite dramatically. What if I want to return to the original patch? Fortunately, nothing we've done is permanent. To get our original patch back, all we have to do is to reselect it. Press the patch button and you'll see the name appears again with an asterisk next to it to show that it's been edited. Just use the increment and decrement keys to move to a new patch and then back again, and now Jimmy D is back to normal. There are a few more parameters to show you, so press the parameter button again if it's not already lit. Press the button to select the control group of parameters and page up to the top, which is where we are anyway. This time you'll notice that we are no longer able to see which tone we're editing in the top left-hand corner of the display. Now it says key mode and bender. Now this is because these parameters affect all 4 tones simultaneously. In other words, they affect the whole patch. For example, the parameter on the far right of the display is bend range. This parameter sets how the patch will respond to incoming pitch bend information. Currently it's set to -12 down and +2 up. That's 1 octave down and 1 tone up. If I play the keyboard and use the pitch bend control, you can hear this in action. And up. Let's make a change and see what happens. I'll change the downward bend range to -2 and the upward to +12. Now when I play the keyboard and use the pitch bend wheel, you can hear the patch go down by a tone and up by an octave. Some of the parameters in this group do affect only 1 tone at a time rather than the whole patch. If I use the up-down arrows to show the various pages in this group, you can see that occasionally the display will show which tones we're editing in the top left-hand corner of the display as before. There's one there, for example. Once we've created a new patch, it's time to name it. To do this, press the parameter button and choose Common, or holding Shift, right arrow across to where it says Patch Name. These parameters are, as their name suggests, common to the whole patch and include things like overall level, pan, and key range. There we go, level, pan, and there's key range. Let's page up to the top for now, where we can see the current name of the patch with the cursor flashing under the first letter. The data wheel, or the increment and decrement buttons, allow us to select a different letter. And the arrows move us, left and right arrows move us through the word. That's now MIDI. As you can see, it can take some time to find the letter or number you're looking for, but help is at hand. By pressing the Shift button and keeping it held in, a useful set of functions appear across the bottom of the screen here. Top, end, del, ints, and change, CHG. These quickly take us to the top of the available list of characters, the end of the list, delete a character, insert a character, and switch between upper and lower case. To use them, keep the Shift button held and use the 5 buttons under the display that correspond to the options on screen, like this. It takes us to the top, the end, there you go, A, Z. There you go, I can delete a letter, insert a letter, and there's A, there's little a, lowercase and uppercase. Well, we'll call this one MIDI for now, because I couldn't be bothered to do it. It'll take too long to spell it out. So now we've named the patch, it's time to actually save it. Press the Utility button here. Now there are in fact 2 pages of parameters in the Utility section, but we're only concerned with the top page, i.e. this one, for now. Use the up-down arrows to get to the top page if you weren't already there. Now the right option should be flashing. There we go, it's flashing there. If it's not, use the left-right arrow buttons here to select it. Now, press the Enter button here. This is where we select the location where we want to save our new patch. You can save a patch into any of the 128 user locations or onto a data card. For now though, we'll save this patch into one of the user locations of the JV1080. As we saw earlier in the video, there are already patches in the user bank, so we'll have to overwrite one of them with our new patch. You can now use the data wheel or the increment decrement buttons to scroll through the possible locations and see which patch is currently in that location. I'll select user location 1, 2, 1. Bass pits. Now press the enter button to confirm that we want to save our patch here. The display now tells me that the user memory is write protected. To override this, simply press the utility button again and your patch will immediately be written to the selected user location. There we go, complete. You can do some really clever things in the patch edit mode and more importantly, at speed. Now I've only been able to show you a fraction of the parameters and what they do. One of the best ways to see what can be done is to choose a patch you like and see how it was put together by looking around in the edit mode. Remember, nothing you do is permanent. You can always put it back to the way it was if you make some horrible mistakes. In particular, take a look at how some of the tones in a patch are set to only sound when the keyboard is played at a particular velocity. For example, adding a slap to a bass patch when you hit the key hard, or giving a brass patch some extra bite, for example. Also, you'll find some tones that only play on certain areas of the keyboard, and patches which have certain tones that only respond to certain MIDI information, like modulation wheel or sustain pedal. So far, the patches we've played have all been tonal. In simple terms, we haven't heard any drum sounds yet. Well, never fear, we have access to a whole bunch of drums and percussion sounds using the rhythm mode. We access it by pressing the rhythm button here. There is something very important to take into consideration at this point. Because of the general MIDI standard, it is usual for drums and percussion patches to be assigned to MIDI channel 10. By that I mean that only information transmitted to the JV1080 on MIDI channel 10 will trigger any of the rhythm patches. This is quite usual and doesn't really present any problems. It simply means that I must set my MIDI keyboard to transmit on MIDI channel 10, or if using a computer sequencer or hardware sequencer, select MIDI channel 10. We'll come back to using the JV1080 with a sequencer later on. As you can see, the display has changed to show a rhythm set. In this case, it's GM1 GM drum kit. As with the patches, I can use the data wheel to scroll through all of the available rhythms. Now, the JV1080 provides us with 10 rhythm patches, 2 user and 2 in each of the 4 presets A, B, C and D. And D is GM. If I play the keyboard, you can hear the drums and percussion sound spread out across the keys. We have kicks and snares and hi-hats and cymbals and woodblocks and all sorts of percussion sounds. Each rhythm patch has its own group of sounds, as you can hear. The house drum set is a jazz drum set. As with patches, we can edit rhythms in the same way. Pressing the parameter button lets us choose which group of parameters we want to edit. Again, as with patches, the orange colour here, it's the top row of legend that interests us. Let's start with the wave parameters, so press the wave button here. This is where, as with patches, we can assign the raw waveforms that are the basis for the rhythm. But in this case, we're assigning a wave per note, not across the whole keyboard. The note we are actually assigning the wave to is shown on the display here. And you can select any note by simply pressing the key, or rather a key, on your keyboard. We're currently looking at the parameters for C2 there. You can easily select D2, F2, and so on and so on. Let's go back to C2 for now. The parameters shown across the screen should be fairly familiar. We've done patch editing already. Group is where you select where the wave is coming from, internal A or B, a card, or one of the wave expansion boards. You can, of course, assign any wave in the JV1080 to a key in a rhythm, from piano through to guitars, but it's more usual to use one of the many drum and percussion waves available in the JV itself, or from the expansion boards. If I use the left-right cursor keys to move to the wave number parameter, I can scroll through all the waveforms in the current group. Here's a different tom sound, hi-hat, different kick sounds. Let's leave it on hybrid kick for now. It's easy to create a complete new rhythm using any waves you want. The switch parameter here is where you actually turn a note off so it won't respond within the rhythm. To further enhance the waves, There are a host of parameters available, very similar to those in the patch edit mode. The pitch, TVF and TVA parameters that we looked at in the patch edit mode are also available in rhythm edit and can create some very interesting effects on percussion-based waves. Let's take a look at some of the parameters we didn't look at in patch edit and see how they affect a rhythm. Let's take a look at the effects parameters. Now, if you're in parameter mode, obviously you just press the button. If you weren't, remember it's shift and then across. We've now selected the effects. In a standard patch, this group of parameters would enable us to add different amounts of reverb and chorus to individual tones within a patch. In rhythm edit mode, we can actually add differing amounts of reverb or chorus to each individual sound or tone. We can also send each rhythm tone to a different audio output. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the JV1080 had 6 audio outputs. They are grouped in 3 stereo pairs: mix left and right, output 1 left and right, and output 2 left and right. Now, we're currently connected to the mix output. The point of these extra outputs will become clearer in a second, but put simply, it allows us to assign whole patches or individual tones to each output. Each audio output can then be connected to a different channel of a mixer, for example, and each patch or rhythm tone can have a different external effect or equalization set to it. In the case of a rhythm set, it allows us to separate out certain drum sounds and then record them onto separate tracks of a tape machine for easier balancing in a mixing situation. The first parameter we can see is output. The increment and decrement keys switch between the mix output, EFX, i.e. effects, output 1 and output 2. Currently, the quick kick drum which we'd selected was assigned to the mix output. The internal reverb and chorus, which we'll look at later, are automatically added and sent to the same output. So we could, if we wanted to, add reverb on full for that, 1, 2, 7. If I turn the volume up, you can now hear the kick drum sound with reverb added. Selecting output 1 or 2 here would have sent the kick drum out of either of one of those outputs, this time with no reverb or chorus. Selecting EFX sends the rhythm tone to the effects section and to the reverb and chorus. Each output assignment has its own level setting as well, so each rhythm tone can have its own level. The remaining effects parameters relate to using the rhythm set within a performance, which I'll be dealing with in the next tutorial. Once we've created a new rhythm set, it can be named and stored to a user location or data card in exactly the same way as we stored our patch. In performance play mode, you can combine 15 patches and a rhythm set to create even more complex and interesting sounds. Obviously, layering 15 patches and a rhythm set on top of each other is going to sound like a total mess if they all sound as soon as you press a key. A typical example, though, might be layering of several patches together to create a huge ethereal pad sound, for example, for a film score you might be working on. Performance mode is also the mode you would use if you're using an external sequencer with the JV, such as eMagic's Logic software or Steinberg's Cubase. 15 patches and a rhythm patch can be set up and then accessed from your sequencer. To get to the performance mode, simply press the performance button here. Now, there are a whole selection of performances preset in the JV1080 already, so let's check a few of them out first of all. They are arranged in a similar way to the patches, a user bank, but only 2 preset banks, A and B. Each bank this time, though, only has 32 performance patches in it. You can select them in exactly the same way as the patches by using the user and preset buttons here, and the A and B buttons, and then the data wheel in combination with the increment, decrement buttons, and don't forget shift, make yourself go up and down in tens. Some performances are already set up to be used with a sequencer. Others are set up to be played directly from a MIDI keyboard. Let's take a look at the performances that can be instantly played from a MIDI keyboard first. I'll select performance user 002. User 002. This one's called Opening Orchestra. Have a listen to this. A pretty amazing sound, hey? That's because 6 different patches were layered and played together, creating that huge orchestral sound. I know that 6 patches created that performance because these 6 lights were lit. In performance play mode, it's the blue legend above the buttons that concerns us. Again, to make life easy, that's the same colour as the name above the performance button here. In performance mode, these become the part switch buttons. Each of the 16 parts is represented by one of the buttons. But wait, I thought the JV1080 allowed us to play 16 patches simultaneously. How do we get the other 8? There's only 8 buttons here. This button to the left here is the answer. In performance mode, when it isn't lit, the part select buttons represent parts 1 to 8. When it is lit, they represent parts 9 to 16. So how do I know that all 6 parts were playing at the same time? When a part plays, its parameter select switch will flash like this. You can now see that all 6 parts are playing. Before I delve any deeper, let's hear a few more performances. User 015 is a bass lead sound and uses only 2 parts. You can see that here. This time, there is a range set to each part so that the bass patch only plays in the lower half of the keyboard and the lead patch at the top. Have a listen to this. Another favourite of mine here is user 30, which is called Pop Ballad. Enter Whitney. If I select one of the preset performances, so press preset, and we select number A12, pop set 1, when I play, like that, only a piano sound can be heard. And although all the part switches are lit for parts 1 to 8 and 9 to 16, only the first part switch flashes when I play, like so. That's because most of the preset performances are set up to be used with an external sequencer. All the parts are allocated to patches, but each part is set to receive on a different MIDI channel. MIDI channels 1 to 16, in fact. The keyboard I'm using is transmitting MIDI on channel 1, so only the patch assigned to part 1 is playing. If I change the transmit channel of my MIDI keyboard to, say, channel 5, I'll just do that for you, to 5, there we go, and play, a string sound plays and part switch 5 flashes. The most obvious thing to do next is to see how these performances are actually put together. How could we split the keyboard, combine a sound, or set up the JV1080 for use with a sequencer? Well, here's how. Editing a performance works in a similar way to editing a patch. I often find that the easiest way of creating a new performance is to edit an existing one. I'll use this pop set 1, preset A12, as my example. This has been preset as a 16 multi-timbral example, 16-part multi-timbral example. This will be ideal for use with a sequencer, as each part has been assigned to MIDI channels 1 through 16. To select a parameter to edit, we need to press the parameter button, and now select a parameter to edit. It's now the second row of blue legend, that's this one here, don't forget blue is relating to performance, that concerns us. The first thing we need to do is to assign a patch to each part. I set up a sound for each part, which, as you might expect, is done by pressing the part button here. The display shows that it's part 1 we have selected in the left of the display and that we're editing the patch parameter. As before, the left-right cursor keys move to the relevant parameter and the increment-decrement keys or data wheel change it. At the moment you can see patch 001, 64 voice piano from pre-A or preset patch group A is currently assigned to patch or part 1. If I change it and play the keyboard, you will hear the new patch sound I've selected. So we'll go over here and choose different sounds. There's some electronic piano sounds and Rhodes sounds. I can call up any patch from the user bank, preset bank, card, or wave expansion board and assign it to any of the parts. This can also be done remotely from your sequencer as well. The part switch buttons also act as part select buttons, so to choose a new part to edit, simply turn off the parameter button and select a different part. So we say part 2. Press the second part button there. As with patch edit mode, I don't need to select parameter mode again, as the shift plus left right arrow trick can now select all of these other parameters here for me. This means I can move very quickly between the parts and assign patches. You can see that part 2 has a finger bass assigned to it. Part 3 is a distorted guitar, and so on and so on. To select parts 9 to 16, just press this button here to the left as before. There's 9 and there's 10. Now you'll notice that part 10 is assigned to a rhythm. In fact, part 10 is assigned to rhythm in almost every performance. It has now become a standard in almost all multi-timbral modules and keyboards to have a rhythm patch assigned to part 10 and set to respond to MIDI channel 10 as well. As with patch edit, it would be useful to see all 16 parts on screen at once, so their respective parameters could be compared and edited. Well, that's almost possible using the palette button. Pressing it calls up either parts 1 to 8 or 9 to 16 on the display, depending on whether this cover button here is lit. Now, the left-right arrow keys simply allow us to move between the parts and choose the sounds and parameters. To show both group, either bank and patch, there are 2 pages which, as before, can be selected with the up and down arrows. There's the group and there's the patch numbers. The first page shows the group that the patch is from, i.e. user, preset, etc., etc. And the second page shows the actual patch name across the top here and the numbers at the bottom. If I use the left-right arrow buttons here to scroll across the parts, you can see that it allows me automatically to jump from 1 up to 8, and then the button lights and we go on to 9 to 16. You can still use the part select buttons to go directly to a part, but if you use this editing method, it makes it incredibly quick and easy to set up multi-timbral patches. Once we've assigned a patch to each part, the next thing to do is to check or assign a MIDI channel to the part. Each part can be assigned to MIDI channel 1 to 16, and that is the channel it will respond to. Obviously, this one's in this patch already preset, but let's show you how to do it anyway. To assign a MIDI channel, select the MIDI parameter page. Do that. I'll leave the palette mode on for now so we can see all the MIDI channel assignments at once. If it's not already selected, page up to the top so you can see the channel assignments. As I mentioned earlier, this is the setup you would use if you're using the JV with an external sequencer. 16 different patches can be played simultaneously on 16 different MIDI channels. Here we can see, for example, we have got parts 9 to 16 set to MIDI channels 9 to 16. If I go down, there we can see 1 to 8 set to 1 to 8. Some of the other performances that we've been listening to will have had several parts assigned to the same MIDI channel. This means that a MIDI signal sent from my keyboard on MIDI channel 1, for example, will cause all the parts assigned to that channel to play. That's how the performances, such as the orchestral one we heard earlier, were set up. Let's take a quick look at that preset to see that in practice. So I can leave that mode quickly by pressing exit here, and now find the performance I want. In this case, it's user 02. Opening orchestra. If I now go into MIDI parameters, we can see the first 6 parts, the only ones used in here in fact, are all set to receive MIDI on MIDI channel 1. So there we go, MIDI. There we go, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. The first 6 set to 1. Hence, they all play together. This is how you can set up your own combination of sounds or layered sounds. In fact, you can have a total of between 2 and 16 sounds in total if you really want to. As you can see, there are more pages to the MIDI parameters than just channel, denoted by the arrow here, obviously. If I page down to the next parameter, we can see receive switch. The options here are basically on or off. This parameter simply determines whether a part will receive MIDI or not, so you can quickly turn parts on or off within a performance. Here we can see the first 6 parts are switched on, and the other 2 after here are switched off, and the others on the other page are as well. The other pages determine how each part will react to other types of incoming MIDI information, such as MIDI volume message, hold messages, and program change messages. Remember, we are setting these on a per part basis, so it's easy to set up only certain parts to respond to maybe MIDI volume, for example. Program changes, though, are worth a particular mention. As the JV1080 has over 640 sounds, you may be wondering how these can be accessed from your sequencer. Program change messages, as I'm sure you know, go from value 0 to 127. Well, as the 640 built-in sounds and waveboards are all divided into banks, the use of a bank change message from your sequencer will allow you to A, choose a bank, and then B, choose a patch from within it. So you can basically access all 640 sounds by sending a bank change message and then selecting the program change number, 0 to 127. All of the bank change messages you will need are listed quite clearly on page 79 of your user manual. Refer to this to set up the correct bank change numbers for your own particular sequencer. Selecting the level parameter enables us to adjust the individual level for each part, and pitch, as you'd expect, adjust the pitch with a page for coarse tune and fine tune. The effects parameters are where effects can be assigned to a part, plus the part can be assigned to one of the groups of audio outputs on the rear of the JV. If I exit from the palette mode, you can see a few more of the parameters available in this group. Now, we touched on effects briefly in the rhythm section. Here's how the other parameters we didn't look at affect a performance. Firstly, EFX type. This is where we assign the type of effect and how it's going to be used within the performance. Type selects the effect type to be used. There we have the various different types there. Source is important and determines whether the performance effects parameters will be used for the whole performance, or it allows the patch in a specific part to set the effects parameters for the entire performance. Now, this is really important. All you need to do, though, is to choose the part like so. So we'd set it to 1 to 16. If we do that, that now means that the part we have selected, its reverb parameters or effects parameters will now affect the whole performance group. This is an area people have a lot of problems with when they're using sound modules, multi-timbre sound modules with sequencers. If I set this to 4, we'll do another example here. If I do this to 4, that means that the effects parameters for the patch on part 4 will affect the whole performance. Performance effects parameters, or PRM, selects the effect parameter that we want to edit. It might be overdrive level, EQ gain, or delay time, depending on which effect we've chosen. Check out Chapter 5 in the user manual for a complete list of the effects types and what the various parameters do. Perform effects out selects, as with output assign, which audio outputs the effects will appear at, mix, output 1 or 2. This means that the effects can appear at a different output from the performance it's assigned to, giving real flexibility in internal mixing. The common parameters here allow us to set a key range within which the patch will respond. This is how a performance such as the bass lead performance we looked at earlier would be set up. Let's have a quick look at how this was done. So we'll exit from here and select Performance, User 15. There's that nice bass lead sound. Remember this tune? Now select the common parameters and have a look at the key rang, short for key ranged, you and me. In this example, 2 parts were used, but both were assigned to the same MIDI channel. The bass patch, however, was given a range of C minus 1 to C4, and the lead patch was given a range of C#4 to G9. By doing this, although both parts were assigned to the same MIDI channel, they would only play on specific parts of the keyboard. This is how you split your keyboard. Also available in the common group of parameters is the naming function. This works in exactly the same way as a patch, and the same combination of button presses also enables us to save a performance in one of the user locations. As with the patches, we need to save a performance into an already existing user location or to a data card. In addition to all of that, it's also possible to edit a patch, as we were doing earlier, whilst in performance mode. This is called editing a patch whilst in performance mode. To access this feature, hold the performance button down and press patch. Both buttons, you see, light up. You can now use the arrow keys to select a part and then edit them in exactly the same way as before by using the parameter key. To leave performance mode, or to leave that joint editing mode, press the exit key. General MIDI has now become a worldwide standard in synths and sound modules, and the JV1080 is no exception to this rule. To enter GM mode, hold Shift and press the GM button here, basically the same as the performance button. It's perhaps a good idea to begin by initializing GM mode so you always know you're starting from the same point. Press Utility. You should then see a screen called GM Setup. Press Enter to initialize the GM settings. GM mode works in a similar way to performance mode, in as much as you have 16 multi-timbral parts to which you can attach sounds. This time, though, the sounds are drawn from the 128 in Bank D, the GM bank. To select a sound, firstly choose the part with the left-right arrow keys. And now using the data wheel, or increment and decrement buttons, we can choose a sound. It's as simple as that. When you select part 10, you get a choice of 2 drum kits instead of the 128 sounds. Chorus, reverb and pan can all be controlled using the parameter key and selecting them from the blue line, effects, pitch, pan, or level. So we have effects, pitch, pan, or level. So there's the effects, pitch, pan, and the level of each part. More commonly though, most of these things you'll find today are actually done from your sequencer or automatically by MIDI files you might possibly be working with, so it's actually a lot easier to use than that. The last things, but by no means least, we're going to look at on the JV1080 are the system functions. These are accessed by pressing the system button here. As with everything we looked at already, it's the grey legend matching the system button under the buttons here that concerns us this time. As you can see, there are only 4 parameter groups here. We have setup, MIDI, tune, and preview. Setup enables us to change the LCD contrast of the screen and various power-up options, such as whether the JV powers up with the last patch or performance that was selected, or the default setting already set into the JV, which is normally user 001. Patch Remain here is quite a useful feature and selects whether the sounds of a previously played patch or rhythm are kept on, that is, or not kept off when you change the patch or rhythm. So that means you can be playing a sound live in performance, change the patch until you take your hands off the keys and play again, the sound won't actually change. The MIDI group of parameters is where parameters such as the control channel and the JV1080's ability to send and receive sysx data can be turned on and off. Depending on the mode you were in when entering the system pages, you'll see slightly differing pages which correspond to that mode, i.e. patch or performance, etc. It also covers how MIDI will affect performance and patches. To To look at the performance MIDI functions, we have to exit and just simply reselect performance and then system. There we go. It's here that we can actually select the control channel for use in a performance. The control channel is the MIDI channel that's used to send controlling information to the whole performance. This means you can send MIDI control messages to control the performance as a whole rather than just the individual parts within it. Maybe a program change message or a particular piece of control data. Clock source here is a really useful parameter and sets the clock, the internal clock that is of the machine here, for things like LFO parameters to either an internal tempo value or to an external MIDI clock. This means you can make certain parameters oscillate in perfect time with the tempo of an external sequencer. The rest of the MIDI parameters concern how the JV will respond to different types of MIDI information, or if it will respond at all to things such as sysx and control assignments. The section on system mode in the manual tells you exactly what each parameter does, should you need it. Selecting the tune parameter lets us adjust, as you'd expect, the JV1080 tuning. As you can see, not only can we adjust the overall tuning of the JV in Hertz, but we can also apply different scales to the keyboard. And we can actually program in the different scales. The final set of parameters are for the preview mode. So we go back into System and select Preview. There we go. Now, if you haven't already discovered this, and I've kept this one till last as kind of a surprise, the JV1080 can actually play patches without a keyboard attached. It's actually a really useful way of checking a sound if you have a master keyboard maybe a few feet away, but you're sitting in front of the JV editing. Just press your volume button now and see what happens. Notes. The preview parameters allow us to actually set up what we hear when the volume button is pressed. Either a chord, or single notes, which particular notes, and at which level. A great way for experimenting with weird and wonderful chords. I'll leave you to find your own way around this, as you should by now be becoming something of an expert on this Super JV. Installing the wave expansion boards into the JV1080 is dead easy. Even I, as the world's worst DIY expert, can do it. All you're going to need is this screwdriver tool here, as supplied by Roland in the wave expansion box, and this locking tool here. Two things to remember before you start doing the installation. One is make sure the machine is actually switched off and unplugged before you do this. And secondly, if you can, avoid scuffing across the carpet and petting the cat just before doing this. Otherwise, nothing else to worry about. Let's begin by unscrewing the top cover. Now, I've cheated here. I've only got one screw left. There we go. Take that one out. If I take the cover off now, you can now see the inside of the wave expansion board slots. You can see up here, wave expansion board A has already been fitted, and here B, C, and D we're going to do now. So, first thing to do is to make sure these little white connectors in here align with the socket. So we turn those like that. Basically put them all horizontal with the sockets. There we go. Now, take your first expansion board. What have we got here? We've got a pop expander here. And place that carefully over the slot like so. You should see the little white things poking through like that. Now, push quite firmly down till you hear 3 clicks. There we go. And now, with the locking tool, turn, it's not pushed down far enough, there we go. Turn the key 45 degrees to lock the board into place. There we go, like so. Right, that's one done, that was easy. I think my mother could have done that. Let's put another one now. This one's vintage. Put it down firmly this time, like what I didn't do last time. And then lock it, and lock it. And then lastly, we do one more orchestral. Now, if you're only going to use one or two, make sure you put them in sequence. So use A and B, or just A. You can't use A and D. Well, you can, but it's not advised. Right, the very last thing to do is to take the top cover and put it on again. and then screw it up, and it's as simple as that. Now once you've put the cover back on again, to test that the boards have been installed correctly, all you need to do is to turn the machine back on again, switch to utility mode, and flick down through the pages, and it'll show you which boards are installed in which slots. It's as easy as that. Well, I'm sure you found this video training manual helpful. Can I just add my thanks to Roland Corporation US and Roland UK for their help and invaluable support. Thanks, and good luck to you.
Thank you.